Your host, Joe Haggerty. I'm here with my partner in crime, Jimmy Murphy, and Mike Rupp, longtime NHLer. He's the NHL analyst on NHL Network now. You can catch him on NHL Tonight regularly throughout the season. I always watch. I know Murph does as well. And Rupper, thanks for joining us. And right off the top, before we get to NHL action, I had no freaking idea that you were one of the few, the proud, the Danbury Trashers. This is amazing to me. Just tell us a little bit about that experience and what that was like going through the lockout year, playing with that team.
Yeah, you know what? It was nuts, man. It was the documentary. They did a great job with that. It came out of, it kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, we had the lockout that year, and I needed a place to play. I was a young player, I was 24, and I didn't go to Europe or anything to play. I just figured we'd be playing maybe after the new year. That didn't happen. So I got this phone call, and I think the big thing with it, and I don't know, maybe some people haven't seen it yet, but the crazy part about all this, AJ, the 18-year-old GM of that Danbury Trashers team, the last NHL game he went to was Game 7 when we won the Cup in New Jersey. And I find that that's so ironic in this whole thing is like, in his mind, that was my best game of my career, my life. And in his mind, they needed a goal scorer, and they're like, that guy was good in that game, so let's get him. So I just found it funny. And the best thing about it, too, is when I was watching the documentary, like I watched it like you guys would have, or anybody, I didn't get a preview of it. I watched it the day after it came out. And when I got to that part and they're talking about the lockout, and then, his dad said, I need a, blanket goal scorer. I literally sat to the edge of the couch, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know this part. I wonder who they're getting. Like, they went after an NHL star. I didn't even know this. And then they showed my face, and I'm just like, oh my God. So it was great, man. The whole process. It's been a crazy couple of months because of that documentary.
I mean, are you guys getting like brown paper bags with cash in it and stuff like that? Was it as kind of as crazy as it sounded like some of the things that were going on there? Would you go to the rink every day and not kind of know what to expect every day?
You sound like Darth Vader right now.
Yeah.
the bad connection was back. So yeah, I didn't really understand what you're asking there. You want to try again, or if you?
Yeah, try it again, Haggs.
Yeah. Somebody's muting my mic. All right, you hear me now?
Yeah, but you're still like R2D2 or Darth Vader here.
All right, Murph, you take over.
All right. We'll let you just come back in, all right? All right. I got him muted. All right, going back in. 3, 2, 1. Rupper, so, let's get to that right now. On the topic of fighting, what has been your take on where that has gone and where it's going in the NHL right now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's this argument that's been going on for a while, right? Like there's a place for it in the game. I actually do like the fact that we're kind of getting away from I hated using that word, stage fighting. Because when people say stage fighting, it's like it insinuates that it was fake or it was set up prior to, like, it doesn't really happen like that. Guys aren't like talking the day before saying we're fighting tomorrow. It was like in that moment, hey, you want to go?
11:42 of the first, we're gonna do it.
Yeah, so it's more like in the moment, you want to go, and I'm glad those are gone. Hey, listen, I got beat up in all those times. Like when my adrenaline wasn't going, like you just fight for no reason. Like I never did good, and it's foolish, especially with what we're learning now. But there's a place for fighting in hockey, absolutely. I think so, and I think the players want it and always have wanted it. And I will say, though, that some things that we're seeing happen, I do believe that if there was – this is my best way to explain this, is what's the goal in a hockey game? It's to shut down the opponent's top players. Mm-hmm. Well, there's some players that you just can't simply defend straight up. You know what I mean? So – or you try to keep a thumb on them, whatever. You're going to play them physical. That's the name of the game in any sport. You're going to play them hard. I don't care what sport it is, okay? Well, by doing that, guys are scratching, clawing, and grabbing, trying to do anything they can to play in the league. If that's a way and a vehicle to get into the league, you're going to do it. And there once was a time where to be a rat, if you will, you had to be brave too, because if you were a rat, you'd have to answer to it. Yeah. And maybe a team would only have, out of 18 skaters, maybe they only had 2 or 3 rats on the team. You know, maybe there's a time before, maybe don't even want to use the term rat, guys who would be willing to deal with the consequences of doing those things. But when you start removing it, now you got 18 players that are theoretically able and willing to do it. Why? Because they don't have to be brave. You know what I mean? Like, and I'll even use an example like Marshy. Like when Marshy first came in the league, like he played that way, but he would back it up. I think he'd back it up. Would I consider him a rat at that time? Yeah, I would. But he backed it up. I didn't have a problem with him because he would stand up for things that he did. You know what I mean? It's like, so if guys don't have to stand up for it, everyone's going to do it. And at the end of the day, you want to shut down and slow down those top end guys. I mean, it's just going to, you know what I mean? It's just going to make it more difficult. Like some of the things you see, I was watching in the game last night, like Brock Nelson comes and trying to take a big run at Alex Killorn. And it's like, I like in that moment, he turned around and Anthony Cirelli came at him and fought him. You know what? Bang, there's your consequence. You want to take a run at a guy, and that's the consequence. Yep. If he doesn't have to do that, and the rules are going to make it so he doesn't ever have to do that, or there's no fighting at all, do you know how many people are going to take runs whenever they want at everybody? Because you're trying to provide something different. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I think it's going to make things really sticky. I think there's definitely fighting as a place in hockey.
It's just like what we were saying off the air before Haggs got on Haggs. We were talking about Subban and, you know, what just happened with Sammy Blades. And now he's out for the season. And, you know, Subban's doing this. And, like, you know, Rupper kind of will explain a little better than me. But, I mean, it's not necessarily that all these slewfoots are so much intent to injure. It's more that, you know, the game's passing him by. He's a little slower right now, and he has to make do. But it's the fact that he can get away with it, and nothing's being done by Department of Player Safety. So now it's going to be, all right, do you want the players to police themselves or not? So it's going to be interesting to see what happens the next time those two teams play. I wouldn't be surprised if Subban suddenly has the flu, but we'll see.
Yeah. You see the superstar players who obviously are going to be the targets of this stuff from the rats and the players going over the line, do what Sidney Crosby did the other night and take matters into his own hands and, you know, throw a guy head first into the boards. And you're going to see more of the star players and not even, you know, guys like Ovechkin that don't mind playing that way, you know, get into some of the rougher stuff to try to protect themselves because nobody else is out there with them to do it for them. And it's interesting that, you know, does the league want that? Does the league want superstar guys getting into the muck with everybody else to try to protect themselves? Or do they want somebody out there that's going to, you know, cause some accountability on the other side and be a deterrent like we saw back in the day? And it's funny, I always liken, and I wrote about it at the time, as the turning point for all this was when Shawn Thornton got suspended the 15 games for going after Orpik when he was trying to protect Louis Eriksson. And I thought that was a message from the league that, you know, we're done with this enforcer stuff. We're done with that, you know, kind of play and that kind of fighting, and we're going in a different direction. It was kind of protecting, you know, guys like Orpik that would take runs at other players and then didn't want to fight about it afterwards. And it was interesting to see that happen then. And I think this has been a phenomenon that's been happening ever since. Yeah,
no, it's a good point. I mean, I think that that's the thing that gets misconstrued when you have these conversations, that people think that I'm calling for it to go back to what it was even prior to me. No, I don't want that. The game's never been faster, more skilled than it is right now. I'm just saying, and I think that the hockey people that are making the decisions know this. It's a slippery slope if you take it out too aggressively, too quickly. You know what I mean? The way that they took it out and phased it out has been such a progression where a lot of these kids that are coming up now, they know that fighting is not a vehicle that's going to get you to the NHL now. You know what I mean? Like, you've got to be able to be a great skater. You got to be able to provide something. That could be something that maybe tips you over the top a little bit. But I think that started to weed out where players are training to, like, I'm going to be an enforcer in the NHL. That doesn't happen anymore. So that's a start. So, like, if you go too aggressive too quickly, I think it changes. It'll change it for the worse. So, but yeah, in that PK situation, like, we were talking about it. Murph and I were talking about it. Like, I don't see any intent, and I don't believe there's any intent there. Has PK done dirty stuff in the past? Yeah, he's been a little sneaky sometimes. I don't think any of those hits, the Reeves hit, the Lucic hit, the Sammy Blais hit, I don't believe any of those were intentional. What they are is, and what I see is a player coming in the corner that doesn't move like he used to. And even if it's, I'm not saying he's going in there thinking that Ryan Reeves is going to get him the shimmy and jump out of the corner. I'm just saying his whole game now, he doesn't move like he used to. So he's going in there going wide base. And when you go wide base in the corner and a guy's trying to beat you out of the corner or trying to cycle the puck, you're going to clip him, and he's clipping them left and right. So either something has to happen to show him and show others, like, hey, I don't care what the circumstances are, you can't do that. Or I don't know. I think that if you're PK Subban, you got to answer this. You know what I mean? And if you just got to, if you don't want people talking about this in that manner, then you just got to go answer it. And, we haven't seen that from him yet.
Yeah. Haggs?
Just widening out the scope here. What are your takes, just Eastern Conference wise here? First month of the season, teams that have surprised you, what you've observed, the trends that you think you're seeing in the Eastern Conference.
It's a fun conference right now. I mean, I love watching the East. There's things I love in the West too, but the East is where it's at right now for me. There's just, we talk about the teams. I mean, the Florida Panthers, Carolina Hurricanes, I've put them, even though that maybe they both have kind of, I guess, lost a game. They come down to earth. Yeah, I know. But I've kind of put them, and I always I hate ranking teams like 1 through 5 or 1 through 10 or whatever, but I like to put them in tiers. I think it's easier too, because I could be like, all right, these two. So Carolina, Florida for me through these first, what are we at, 15 games, they're in the top tier in the league. And I think they're in there by themselves. And I think that next tier probably starts with maybe like an Edmonton team or some of these other teams in there. And there's probably a lot more teams in that tier. But the interesting thing when you look at it, it's like some of these teams that are like Detroit, New Jersey, some of the things that these Columbus, like, I don't know. I mean, that's what's making the Eastern Conference so difficult, is that, like, you didn't account for that. You know what I mean? So they're taking points that other teams need, but they're also making it a little different. I mean, even if you go out, an example of that's out west, like the worst thing for the Vancouver Canucks this year, besides themselves, is the fact that California is tough again. The California 3 teams, like, they did not see that. No one saw that coming. No. So now this Vancouver team that should have been a bubble team, and now it's like what they're doing right now or not doing right now is digging themselves such a hole, and they have more teams in front of them. And the Eastern Conference is like that too. I mean, you're sitting here, the New York Islanders are still, this is the third last team in the Eastern Conference. Do I expect it to stay like that? No. But I mean, you're 15 games in now, and they're 2 points off Montreal. You know what I mean? Like, it's
was in the Stanley Cup final last year, and they've dropped out too.
Yeah, it's tough sledding.
It's interesting you bring up Detroit and Columbus there. Because I do a betting podcast. I'll be going on it right after this, Rupper and Haggs. And, when we were previewing the season, we kind of wanted to pick some teams to warn bettors, don't sleep on this team. They're going to steal some games. And one of the consensus teams was the Detroit Red Wings. And they've definitely done that. But, Columbus, you bring up Columbus there, and they've really impressed me, because think of the injuries they've had to overcome there. Think of the turnover they've had to constantly deal with, the tragic loss of their goalie in the offseason and all that. Just a lot of distractions. And yet there's something about them. It's even a different coach now, but there's something about that mentality. I kind of credit it to Jarome, where it's just buy into the program, and it's a unified front there. And I like them. And if you're betting, man, you got to watch out for those teams.
You do. You got to watch out for them. And that's what made last night. I was actually looking at that last night too, because it was Detroit versus Columbus. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't like that game, touching that game because I don't know which way it's going to go.
Right.
But you're right. Those two teams, you can't sleep on them. But it's interesting. And I almost use it as an analogy. You guys would obviously know there with Boston is like, I'm not trying to compare Columbus to Boston with the success Boston's had, but when you think of the Boston Bruins, I think of consistency, longevity, the way that this team is. Man, there's years. I mean, I've been doing this now for 7 years, and I would say probably 4 or 5 of the 7 years, I have major concern about the Boston Bruins before the season starts. What do? They're a top-end team every year. You know what I mean? And It starts because they have that. This is coming from a Cleveland Browns fan. I understand that on the other end of the spectrum, and you guys got the Patriots and all that stuff. It's hard to get the winning culture. It's hard to get expectations and where players just kind of fall in, and it's who you are. It's like in the fabric of your team and what you are. Boston does that and at a higher scale, but Columbus has got that going. They've cultivated that with Jarmo, with John Davidson when he was there from the original time, and then Torts and what Torts did there. And you get them. This group there's expectations there. If you're going to play here, this is what you're going to do, and this is how you're going to play. And that's why I love, even with the coaching change, it's like things just keep rolling. And it's impressive because you're right, with the roster that the turnover they've had over the last number of years, they have every excuse in the book to be terrible, and they're just simply not. Because they come out, they work their tails off, and they got other players that are taking advantage of opportunities here that they wouldn't have had if some of those players were still there.
You mentioned the Boston Bruins a little bit there, and I want to get your take on them because they're a fascinating case study right now in that they've lost some very important players over the last few years. Zdeno Chara, Torrey Krug, Kevin Miller, a very underrated player that I think they miss in a big way in the defensive zone. David Krejci, I think they are finding it extremely difficult. Life without Krejci now that he's not there in that number 2 center spot. Tuukka Rask not there, obviously, as well. What are your thoughts on the Bruins to this point? They obviously, Bruce Cassidy did a good job of getting their attention the last couple of games, scratched Mike Riley for a couple of games, started Jeremy Swayman a couple of games in a row, and I think you saw a response from them in a very good way. But I think there are definitely more sort of strengths and weaknesses or gaps on this roster this year with the Bruins that good teams are able to exploit. And I think it's going to be a little tougher for them this year, even though they obviously are going to win their share of games built around that perfection line, having Charlie McAvoy and I think a really good young goalie in Jeremy Swayman.
Yeah, no, I think it's some of the stuff's going to take a little bit of time in regards to the depth. I mean, I'm sitting here, you look at this roster in between Foligno, I played with Eric Halla, Nosek, Jake DeBrusk still has to kind of find his exact role on this team. They have players. It's just about how everybody's going to find their job and find their role and execute that role because they got to complement that top line. I think a big point I've been talking about a lot, and I don't know, I actually would love to hear what you guys have to say about it because seems like forever we're talking about a second line for this Bruins team. Mm-hmm. It was before it was who's going to play with David Krejci. Now it's who's going to play with Taylor Hall. And Charlie Coyle's been okay. Taylor Hall's been okay. He's been pretty good. I don't know if it's as strong. We always just say, "Oh, the second line has to be better." It's like I think they've been okay this year, but they need to be. I want to see something that is going to take some real pressure off the top group. You know what I mean? Like legitimate pressure. Excuse me, pressure. Because those guys never take a night off ever, that top group. They've been the most consistent line in hockey over the last however many years. But at the end of the day, it's hard for me I don't know what to make of this Bruins team. Because again, I come into this year and I'm like, I think the Bruins might take a step back. It's too early to say that right now. Part of me expects them to still be one of the top teams in that division because they're the Boston Bruins. That's what they do. But it's almost just status quo right now for the Bruins. They need something. They need those depth guys to come together and provide something different. Maybe even like how the Islanders get that fourth line to do things. You know what I mean? Or if they find the right mix there, or that second line, if it's Charlie, then it's Charlie. And if him and Halsey find a groove, and you find that right, the proper winger on the other side, like, now you're cooking with gas. Now I'm ready to say Boston's ready to do something this year. Right now, I don't know. They're going to be good. Yeah, they're going to be good. They're going to be in the playoffs. And I just don't know what's changed up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, Haggs, I think we'd both agree. It's the middle. And, even before Krejci left, we were looking at the center depth there. And look, I know Bergeron doesn't play like it, but Father Time will catch up. And eventually he's done. And he doesn't even have a contract for next year. But it's just – I feel like it's an issue. I know they got Charlie Coyle, but I feel like what Charlie Coyle did when he first got here and the way he slotted in at the 3C slot, he looked so much more comfortable than how he did in Minnesota, right? They were just playing him out of his element in Minnesota, and he just sort of slid in there. The spotlight wasn't on him, and I think he's better when that's the case. And I'm looking at it now. Okay, so who is the 2C of the future? Who's the 1C of the future in Boston? And I think we're starting to see those question marks become a little more evident this season. And I'm just wondering at what point do they say, you know what, screw it. Let's give the kids a chance. I mean, we've seen him dabble a little with Studnicka, but they haven't really committed to him. And I'm not saying that's all on the coaching staff or the team. He needs to show it too. But at what time do they just roll the dice and accept some mistakes here and there and let some of these younger guys establish themselves in the middle?
Yeah, and I think that's a legit question. And Studnicka's coming off a great training camp, and obviously that's the guy, really the only guy they have in the organization right now that could potentially step into a top 6 center role at the NHL level, whether it's this year or the next couple of years. They have some centers and some talented forwards, but they're years away when you talk about Beecher and Lysell and guys like that. Studnicka's the only guy they have, I think, that could really be in that role, and they haven't. And it's tough. Bruce Cassidy's in a difficult situation because, as Rupper alluded to, the Boston Bruins are a team with expectations. They're a team that expects to be in the playoffs. They're a team that, whether it's Cam Neely, whether it's Jeremy Jacobs, whether it's Don Sweeney, they all expect this team to win games and get into the postseason. And it's hard to integrate too many young guys while also still worried about the bottom line one-loss results on a night-to-night basis, because sometimes – you're going to get, more steady play, win more games with a guy that you think is reliable, that you're going to get out of, than a guy like Studnicka that's obviously going to go through growing pains. And we kind of saw that, with Carson Coleman and Oscar Steen. The Bruins call up Oscar Steen in New Jersey, don't play him. Bruce Cassidy puts in Carson Coleman instead, because that's sort of more of a known quantity in a guy that Bruce Cassidy knows what he's going to get out of him. And obviously Steen played the next game, and they'd have some guys that are banged up. Craig Smith is definitely playing through an injury right now. He still does not have a goal to start the season, and that's been part of the second line, Rupper, that I think we've seen stops and starts. If Craig Smith's right and he's healthy, I think he brings a dynamic there that makes them a more multi-dimensional line. But bottom line, end of the day, Charlie Coyle, I agree with you, Murph. I'm not sure that he's a second-line center in the NHL on a Stanley Cup contending team. I think he'd be much better as the third-line center. Go ahead, Rupper. What were you going to
No,
say?
so I play with Chucky in Minnesota, and so I agree with you on that. And I love him. He's one.
Yeah, it's not a knock.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody knows there. He's one of the greatest human beings I've been around.
He is.
Yeah,
he's an awesome dude. I think we used to call him Baby Gronk when we were there, because he's got that. He's a man child. That's what he was when I played with him when he was a little bit younger, and he's a freak of an athlete. Charlie Coyle, in my opinion, is slotted appropriately at 3C, and he can go out there and, you know what, at 3C, he might get you 15 plus 20. He can push 20 goals. He can get you that. So that's a pretty good third line center if you can get that out of him. Really good on both sides of the puck. He can provide a little bit. He can play on one of your power play units, probably your second unit. But where the rubber meets the road with Charlie Coyle is playoff time. So get him in a role that he doesn't have to have so much on his plate per se, as far as trying to carry offense and get outside himself. Because come playoff time, let's say for example, there's a lot of what ifs, but say Craig Smith's healthy. You got Craig Smith, Taylor Hall, put Studnicka in there. Let him run for 15 games. Figure it out. And then at least you could smoke it out over a stretch. You know what I mean? Now you got Chucky on a third line, and there's plenty of personnel on this roster that you can make a solid third line there. Right. Next year, come playoff time, we're always going to be talking about the perfection line. I'll tell you what, we'll be talking about that Charlie Coyle line, because that's where he'll make his difference. He's big, he's powerful, he's fast. He's got when he gets a little, you can't really do anything about it.
Yeah, 2019.
He just doesn't have it. He just doesn't have it the whole season. Nobody's almost comparable to totally different players, but I just mean from this standpoint is like a man-child. He's almost like Chris Kreider. I know Chris Kreider's having a hell of a season this year. He's so far. I play with Kreids. His biggest struggle in his career has been inconsistency. I don't know if Chris Kreider is like a top end. Like, he could get you 30 goals, but he might go 17 games without a goal in between at some point there. You know what I mean? So I think that Charlie, if he's in that role, now you're cooking here. So I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, yes, but that's second line. But let me ask you this. This came up the other day, and I was arguing with someone at NHL Network about it. I'm sitting here thinking that at the end of this, I don't know, sometime in late winter, David Krejci's coming back, right?
I don't know. Doesn't he have to pass through waivers though?
Yeah, if past December 15th, I think it is, right? He has to pass through waivers. Becomes any later than that?
It's on the Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah, he's passed through waivers. Have the Arizona Coyotes claim him, throw him a third-round pick, and you get David Krejci.
Let me ask you: do you think? And people have asked me this. Do you think there's some gentleman's agreement that all the other GMs would let him pass through waivers to get back to the Boston Bruins? Because I absolutely do not think that is the case.
No. If that was the case, I would stop watching hockey. I don't know. Hey, listen, I love it. I would love to see the Bruins get over the hump, but that would be the biggest fleecing ever. David Krejci's a hell of a player still. You know what I mean? No team, and think of all the other teams. No teams. There's going to be playoff teams that would have to say no. You don't think David Krejci can help some of those teams? You know what I mean? Or even, geez, you could even be. I'm looking here. I mean, if Toronto's picking in the waiver order, I'd be like, I'll claim him just so Boston can't get him. You know?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the thing. They could do it just to block him from going back, right? I mean, not even be interested in a draft pick like the Coyotes or somebody else, just a competitor that might have to see him in the playoffs. And he's watching those poor bastards in the Czech Republic try to defend him right now.
Yeah. And they can know that he's not going to come there. You know what I mean? We're going to claim him. He's not going to report. We don't have no skin off our back, and we can keep him out of Boston. I don't know. I just have this thought in my head that David Krejci will be wearing a Bruins uniform.
Oh, hey, we hope you're right. I mean, it shows. I think Haggs, you and I, we don't always agree on Tuukka Rask, but I think one thing we agreed on was just how important David Krejci was to that team over the years. And we saw it every year in the playoffs when he'd even elevate even more. It was just that consistency. And now you see how important that consistency is to the flow of the lineup when you don't have it. And, like you were saying, Rupper, there, if you can get a solid third line, then you get Stanika works in the middle there, or say Krejci comes back. I mean, let's look at the teams, though, that have won the cup over the years. You've been on some of those teams that go deep. I mean, they always have a great third line, right? Look at Tampa Bay the last few years. Yeah. And I don't know if right now, with the way the Bruins are throwing it out there, if they can do that. I think they have the people to do it, but they're sort of just kind of throwing a mishmash out there and trying. They're still feeling their way. It's not Thanksgiving yet, but if they're still doing this come January, they could be in some trouble.
Yeah, and that's a good point you made. I was just thinking while you said that, even if looking on top of my head, sometimes not third, sometimes it's even fourth. But you sit and look back at prior cup winners, you just named it. The third line Tampa, I don't know if they win those two cups. Who's before that? That's St. Louis. St. Louis had that third line. The fourth line, wasn't it? St. Louis had that. Didn't they have Steen? They had isn't this Steen?
On that?
What's that?
Was Sanford on there? No.
I'm sorry. I didn't hear what you said.
Zach Sanford.
Yeah, Sanford was on that maybe.
Yeah.
Yep. So, but they had a line like that. And you look back to the Lars Eller line and Washington. I mean, that's important. You got to have that. So I think that's a tough part. And some of those guys I named before, and I don't know all the young guys. You would know the young guys in the organization that can maybe be impactful more than I do probably there in Boston. But there's enough veteran guys on that roster that if you just got to find the right mix, and it's easier said than done. But there's players there that if you can get some groove going on that second line and get a third line going, now all of a sudden, look out, it's the Boston Bruins.
Yeah. If you say you played with Erik Haula, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Where do you think, if you were coaching the Bruins, where do you think his best fit would be in that lineup?
I would have Erik Haula on a third line and
center, wing. Where do you think?
I play him at wing. I know that you would have two lefties, but I don't know. I'm intrigued if what would a Coyle, Haula, and Foligno line look like? You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't know if maybe it wouldn't work. I'm just sitting there thinking, I know Erik Haula, the one thing that he does really well, he's quick, he's got a quick stick, he forces turnovers, and that you need a disruptor. He's a disruptor. Charlie can be a disruptor, and Foligno's a disruptor. They can be very difficult to play against. And, maybe if it's not one of them, you move them out, you move another guy in that spot, and there's other guys on that roster that can fulfill that. But if they can have a line that can just be out there, just kind of creating a little bit of chaos now and again, and I don't mean like big bad Bruins chaos. I mean, just like forcing turnovers, keeping the other team on their heels. Next thing you know, the big line jumps over the board, and they're going to capitalize on some of those turnovers in possession.
Haggs?
Well, before we let you go, Rupper, I do want to ask you any Jarome Aguinla stories as he was inducted into the Hall of Fame over the last couple of days?
I got one in so I was in Minnesota. It was my last year playing. He was in Colorado. And that was the year. Remember, that was the year that the kids there in Colorado, I think, was Jerome on that team when they won the division. Remember that when they had that big breakout year?
Yep.
Colorado, I think, won the division. Then they kind of went down a little bit for a few years. So I was like McKinnon, Duchesne. They had all those guys there. And I'm pretty sure Jerome was on that. I know Jerome was here in this moment because the story wouldn't make sense if he wasn't. But I think that was the year. But anyways, so it was a little bit of a rivalry with Minnesota in Colorado, and we're in Colorado and we're lined up for a face-off. And I wanted to kind of, get our team a little more involved. So I line up with Jerome the start of the second period, and I'm like, I'm gonna play around with Jerome here. And we had a young team in Minnesota, so I'm gonna show up this future Hall of Famer, just physically show that I'm gonna push him around,
Yep.
So I come up to I know Jerome's tough, but I'm thinking to myself, this guy's had a Hall of Fame career. He's not gonna want to do any of that. He might slash me or whatever, but whatever. So I come up, I line up with him, and I give him a little shove, and we're playing a little game of real estate at the face-off. And then I give him a really good one shove, and then all of a sudden I look, and he goes, let's go. And I'm like, what? Call me up. I'm like, wait a second. At this point, at this point in my career, I was fighting for a while. And I'm thinking, there's no way that, first of all, it's dumb for him to do this. Why would he waste his time with me at that point? I was barely playing in Minnesota at the end of my career. And he's he challenged me to go. And I was like, oh, well, I guess we have to fight now. And by the time I do that, another guy on their team came over and pushed my skates out from under me, and I fell. So they called a penalty. So we were on the power play. So then we ended up not fighting. So but I was like, holy crap. This dude's a gamer. And I knew this through and through. I knew this playing against him over the years, heard stories about him. But even as I don't know how old he was then, but he was, he didn't have to do it, but he would do it. And that's the thing with Jerome that I loved, is that if there's someone who didn't have to play tough, it's the guy that has scored 600 goals. You know what I mean? He doesn't have to do that anymore. He's a goal scorer, but he did. And he would do it no matter what the circumstance was. And I was like, whoa, this guy's the real deal.
Yeah, for sure. You know what? Before we let him go, Rupp, you got to tell Haggs what you're telling me about Thornton there too.
Oh yeah.
We talk about Shawn Thornton. For those who don't know, Shawn Thornton just had a book come out, and
yes,
I got my copy in the mail. And but Rupper had some great story about when he was playing against him.
Oh, dude, I can tell you a few from him. He's I always heard, I never knew him. As far as like, I never played with him. We had a lot of conversations on the ice. We had a couple good fights too over the years, but I always heard from people, dude, he's the best. He's the best guy ever. And you guys all know that.
Yep.
Everybody knows that. And so, but I'd line up with him and he would always talk and, hey, Rupper, what's up, man? How are you? You good? Yeah, I saw that goal last week. Sick backhand. Blah, blah, blah. And he'd sit there and I'm like, well, this guy's really nice. Like, I like this guy. And then the next face off, he talked to me again. But, when you're doing that line of work, there's a lot of people who aren't very honest, And so I'm lining up. I'm like, is he trying to trick me here? I was like, he made me, the more nice he would be, the more nervous I would be. I would just keep backing off the face-off circle because I'm like, he's going to jump me. He's waiting. He's softening me up and he's going to come in here and just beat the wheels off me. And I didn't trust him. I was always waiting. For him to do something cheap. And he never did. Did anything cheap. He was just a stand-up, hard-nosed, tough dude that everybody loved, and I enjoyed playing against him. And we had times. There was one game we were playing. I was in New Jersey, and I remember this distinctly. I had a shift where I just ran from one side of the ice to the other, and I hit like 3 guys. Boom, boom, boom. It was the end of my shift. Thornton jumps over the boards, skates up to me, and he goes, "We got to go." And I'm like, I'm dying. I was going off for a line change. Right. I was going to my bench, and he came and cut me off, and he just got out. So he's fresh. I'm dead. And he goes, "We got to go." And I look at him. I'm like, "Dude, I'm gassed." And he goes, "I'll give you time. Don't worry about it." And so we square up for the fight, and he backs off, and he's just like, "You let me know when you're ready." And I this is probably fine on YouTube. I put my hands on my knees, and I'm like, I was trying to catch my breath to fight him, and he's like letting me catch my breath before we fight. And I was just like, dude, this guy doesn't have to do this. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then when we came in to fight, we're getting in close, and he goes, "Where do you want to go? You want to go lefts or you want to go rights?" I'm like, "What?" I'm like, this guy's still asking me. Like, I don't like how nice he is. He's driving me crazy. But no, I love playing against Thornton.
Pint of Guinness here? You want a pint here to have with the fight?
I know, man. I was like, I don't know what this guy's doing, but I don't like it. So he's a class act. I'm gonna check out that book for sure.
Yeah, we're all going to do that. Definition of an honest player right there. And definition of a great hockey analyst and somebody we watch on NHL Tonight, Mike Rupp. We'll see you next time. Thank you very much for the time. We appreciate it.
Anytime, guys. Thank you.
Thanks.